we will be weekly on Fridays by the same link, inviting different guests from U.S. and abroad, trying to get guests and witnesses from Ukraine itself, refugees, maybe refugee stories. Anyway, we have eclectic format here, mostly waiting for commentary, recruiting commentaries from academics, and above all, telling Americans how they can help, and asking everyone about this. Chris White is our moderator, professor of history at Marshall. Please, Chris.
Have we started?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I wanted to make sure also that I had everybody that is supposed to be speaking lined up. Let's see here. I just got on here. Are Suzanne Weise and Patrick McGinley on yet?
No.
Okay. And was there going to be a special guest also?
I might have a couple of special guests. I don't know if they will join us.
Okay.
One from US, another from Poland. And we have a couple of guests which will be with us next week from now. Anara found two women in Ukraine, professionals who are willing to speak with us next week. So we will be formulating questions for them. And we are in contact with them on email. And here I admit a special guest who might say a couple of words. This is Semyon Reznik, a Russian expat, formerly Semyon is in Washington, D.C. He is a writer, a famous journalist and historian on various aspects of Russian history, of course Soviet too, which includes Ukraine. And we share a lot of common background and territory covered over the years. I'm very glad to see Semyon with us. He is invited to many outlets these days, and that's a great honor. I hope, Semyon, that you will be able to tell us something.
Yeah, that's great.
Perspective. Semyon wrote mostly on Jewish questions. He is famous by the book of his response to Solzhenitsyn. 200 years apart, well, to Solzhenitsyn's 200 years together. And he is in D.C. right now. He is joining from D.C. Now, as I said, we might have a lady from Brooklyn who is helping on the ground to refugees in Ukraine. They have a direct group called Helping to Leave. I put their data on our website. They accept direct donations by PayPal. And she will tell us, I hope, what they're doing. But basically, they just help people, help refugees to move around, to go to Poland, help with children, with clothes, medical issues. There is not enough people on the ground in Ukraine in safe areas to direct and take care of refugees, the logistics itself, transportation, whatever, housing. So I see more people joining. We invite everyone. We will not be able to take questions from everyone, so please put your questions in chat, and we will try to take them and direct them or answer. Once again, we have with us right now Dr. Deutsch, our former graduate college dean. Thank you, Leonard, for joining us. Thank you very much. Dr. Deutsch is part of local group where I spoke last Tuesday live. It is a rare event this year locally, and people were asking me specifically about donations to refugee funds, and we're trying to aggregate this information on our website. We're updating it as it comes. So we don't want to overwhelm people, so I'm not making a collection of all of them. We admitted two of our speakers now, Dr. McGinley and Dr. Weise. Is it Weise or Weise?
Weise.
Weise. Okay, excuse me. So we are co-hosts of Marshall University, which is in West Virginia, which is a separate state from Virginia. It's not western part of Virginia, contrary to popular belief. Thank you for agreeing to be with us today. We might not have many people live, but these are recorded, these sessions. We're now doing it, fourth time or fifth time? I lost the count. But we will be doing it every week on Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. And times are turbulent. I myself, I'm a professor of biology, of all things, genetics, but I'm co-hosting with Chris and Anara, who are in history department, and we have all kinds of perspectives and guests on the war that is going on, and everyone who haven't been here before can see our information on the website Ukraine. This is kind of a pun because MU is Marshall University. It's our common abbreviation. So we are doing that. Chris,
I'll get,
if we don't have special guests from, we always give priority to people who are on the ground in Ukraine. We might have one today, a refugee. If not, I think we can give some kind of, we can start with our guests and questions will be directed to them or to us. And if we have someone log in from there or from our help groups in the US, we will have to give them microphone so they can talk to us. Their time may be more limited than ours. We don't put...
Victor, so I was thinking that we would... I'll introduce the three main guests, and then we can get into maybe a couple minutes of news that you would give, right? And then we'll hand it over to our guests so they can talk. We'll ask them questions.
Absolutely.
I'll go ahead and get started now. I wanted to also mention, first of all, my name is Dr. Chris White, for those of you who don't know me, and I just wanted to first thank Larry Charette and Marshall University libraries for putting this together on a weekly basis on Teams. I also want to thank all of the interested faculty, staff, and students who have been participating in our weekly panels, which started 3.5 weeks ago. And the knowledge base for all of this comes especially from Marshall University faculty members Victor Fett, Anara Tabyshalieva, Kateryna Schray, and Stefan Schoeberlein. I really want to thank you for igniting my interest in this issue, and just that first panel presentation really kind of hit it out of the park. It exemplified the type of thing that needs to happen on a university campus, bringing all that talent and knowledge together and experience as well. So we want to keep that momentum going. Last week, we had guests from University of Kentucky and from Ohio University who were Sovietologists, and this week we have guests from right here in West Virginia, up in Morgantown, and also from Georgia. Our guests today are Dr. David Reich, who is a specialist. Sorry, am I messing you? Just one second. William, sorry, I meant to say William. Risch, who is a specialist at Georgia College, historian, who looks at post-World War II Ukraine and USSR history, and he's the author of a book on Ukraine, and he's working on another on Ukraine's Euromaidan revolution. And also with us are two WVU law professors, Patrick McGinley and Suzanne Weise, who have extensive experience in Ukraine, and they're going to talk to us about their connections, their trips there as well. And Professor McGinley also had some experience in the former Soviet Union, too, in Russia itself. And they're going to talk to us about their connections and what they've been hearing so far. So let's go ahead and start then with Dr. Fett's breakdown of the latest news.
Yes, I'm sorry, Simon, you're present 2 times. You may turn off one of your screens. Yes, news are, well, basically, they would call it stalemate, I think. It's 29th day, I believe, today of the war. Technically, I talked to my friends in Kiev. They watch, of course, on their side, more news in Ukrainian and Russian than we can and do. We on our side can see what is going on more in Europe. You all know that President went to Europe, and NATO has some moves. I personally hope that we do not see major shifts which are happening by military reasons, because I truly hope that NATO will respond to President Zelensky's yesterday plea he formulated as you know, give us 1% of what you have. tanks and planes and everything. We know that a lot of ammunition, anti-aircraft, anti-tank is going on through Polish border. We know that Putin's reaction to this was not as they threatened. They do not bomb so far these loads, as far as we know. We know that city of Mariupol, translated from Greek, who founded it as St. Mary's City, is no more. It shared Guernica and Hiroshima fate, more or less. People are still dying under the ruins. We know that the world is watching this carefully. I hope I do not say idly. And we know that there are many fighters who fight. So it is definitely not a blitzkrieg. Russia is not defeated. Ukrainians, however, are adamant in their defeat. They're not surrendering. One only large city in the south fell to Putin's army, Kherson, a place of my childhood tourism with my parents on the Black Sea coast. But I must say, I talked to my friend in Kiev today, and he said, I made an analogy with 300 Spartans, and he said there is a difference. Leonidas knew they will die. We know that we will live and win. This is nicely put. So we will remember it. The reason we are gathering here, there are many reasons. Our first goal is to help the fighters and the refugees and the wounded. Our second goal is, I guess, as practitioners of education, history, and enlightenment, to document what's going on and our position, because it was Martin Luther King, I believe, who said, we will forget voices of our enemies, but we will not forget silence of our own.
Thank you, Victor. I wanted to first turn it over to Dr. Risch. Can you give us your kind of analysis of the current situation going on over there?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. I would say at this point, yes, we have a stalemate. My information comes from Ukrainian and Russian language sources available on the internet. I do have as many as 5 or 6 friends who are in the territorial defense, and I hear from them once in a while. Some friends I have not heard from, such as one living in Mariupol with his elderly father. Last heard March the 3rd, at least through the internet. What I think at this point is that definitely this wasn't a blitzkrieg. It's been nearly a month, and the Ukrainians attacked. To what extent will they be able to continue this fight is a question, because you have to have real military support, the weaponry and the supplies to keep the war effort going. I think that this could last quite a long time, but it depends again on what happens to Western Ukraine, what happens to Lviv, to the supply lines coming from Poland, and will those supply lines continue? At this point, they do continue, but who knows? Because just today, the Russian government announced that the fighting has reached a phase 2. A phase 2 where, I hope everyone can hear me. Can you hear me?
You can hear you better now.
Okay, all right. A phase 2 where the Russian side is going to consolidate its efforts and focus primarily on the so-called land bridge from Crimea to the Donbass, and to add territory to the Donbass, and that the goal of taking over Kyiv isn't really there anymore, isn't as important. I don't know. I mean, this could be an effort to sort of move away from the earlier goals of so-called demilitarization and denazification. Is it possible that there would be a negotiated settlement in which Ukraine would give up Crimea and parts of the South and the Donbass? I don't know. The one thing that I've noticed is that there were rumors being circulated by Turkey's president that Ukraine and Russia were agreeing on certain things. 4 of 6 problematic issues. But then the foreign minister, Kuleba, said that, well, that's not true, what Erdogan had said. So at this point, the war continues. Will the Russians modify their goals? I really don't know. They are trying to regroup around Kyiv, and I think it's becoming clear that they don't have a chance at Kyiv unless the Belarusian forces move in from Belarus, and who knows if those would even remain loyal. I think that they might just desert right away. So, I mean, that hasn't been really, the Belarusians haven't been used as an option. Kyiv is safe, the center probably is safe, but the other problem is that throughout Ukraine there is the extensive bombing of civilians, the bombardment of civilians through missiles, rockets, and sometimes the use of the Air Force. It's really a question of how long this can be sustained, because I know there was a UN report that was conveyed by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, mentioning that if the war continues until the end of 2022, that over 90% of Ukraine's population will be making around $13 a day, that the economy could essentially collapse. So I think Ukraine's allies really will need to provide serious economic aid if this continues. Hopefully it will. As far as my current evaluation of the situation, that's what I see. The other thing that I see is that the South refuses to give in. And in places like Kherson, there has been civil disobedience, and the mayor of Kherson even displayed the large Ukrainian flag, which he actually did, I think, in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, too. And the Ukrainian forces have beaten back the Russians in the Mariupol, not Mariupol, but the Mykolaiv region. So the Russians aren't getting close to Odessa yet. The question is, will they regroup and bring in new forces? Would they use the Air Force? Would they resort to airstrikes that could be more deadly? Will they resort to chemical weapons? The United States is planning for that contingency. That's the evaluation I can give you right now.
Well, I really appreciate you joining us from Georgia at this point, and appreciate your analysis. We'll circle back around to your research on your past two books as well. I want to get a sense from Professors McGinley and Weise, if possible, about what you're hearing from your contacts in Ukraine right now, as much as you can say. Oh, we're not hearing you.
Microphone, please. Unmute.
Yeah, we can't hear it. You there, Pat?
No sound from Dr.
Oh,
McGinley.
yeah, there's no sound coming from you, unfortunately. Well, that's okay. When they can work on that. I would like to ask a follow-up to Dr. Risch, and if anybody else has a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. Can you give us a sense of what you think the U.S. media is missing right now in terms of the bigger picture of what's going on over there?
Well, I think the problem is, again, the lack of sources and lack of information. Information from Mariupol is very spotty at best. But I don't know what is going on with the Azov battalion there. They seem to be defending the city, and they're providing us with information on it. But as far as how much they're going to be able to sustain that fight, it's unclear. I would say that it's important to acknowledge that, as in any war like this, which would be equivalent to our 9/11, there has been a restriction on certain freedoms. This past week, actually, a number of political parties were, their activities were suspended, if I'm not mistaken, including the For Life Opposition Bloc Party and the Socialist Party of Ukraine and the progressive socialists who aren't really that important anymore in politics anyway. But and also that the presidential administration has essentially guided the media into focusing on one platform. The different television channels are to join in one platform to provide the news. I suppose this would happen in any country that's under attack like this, that there is going to be some information that's being controlled, of course. But I mean, how that affects our perception of events is a good question. I mean, where are we getting a lot of this information? It does come from Telegram channels, some of them from the ground, but some of them are not terribly reliable. Unfortunately, yesterday, for instance, a sociologist who I regard as quite reliable and critical, he circulated a tweet from Twitter of a video that showed Ukrainian protesters standing against Russian soldiers, but actually it came from 2017, early 2017, which suggests to me that this was the protest on behalf of blockading the Donbass region back then in January, February 2017. And those people were confronting Ukrainian security forces, actually. So it was a very different scenario. So you have to be aware of those things. On the other hand, what else do we have for sources? It comes from these videos from Telegram. And there are organizations in Ukraine that do try and convey the news in a certain manner to win over Western opinion. That's true. So we have to sort of sift through the information constantly. But I think the information does suggest that, I mean, the war is taking a heavy toll on everyone. And it's a good question how long this can be sustained. If there are going to be as many as 4 million refugees and 10 million displaced when the population had already gone down to 37 million. There hasn't been a census since 2002, I think it was, 2001, 2002. And some have projected that the population was 37 million before the war, before this invasion started.
Thank you. We have Professors McGinley and Weise back with us. Have you figured out if your microphone works? Nope. Okay. That's okay. Well, maybe Pat, do you want to use Suzanne's? Suzanne, does yours work?
Yes, it does. We'll join together.
Okay. Great. Well, do you want to, Suzanne, do you want to, okay. All right, we'll go ahead and wait on that again. So while we're actually waiting for them to do that, I would love Dr. Risch to talk a little bit about how what your research has been about, your first book and then this latest one. Oh, you're muted too.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonders of modern technology.
Oh, okay. McGinley's back on. Pat, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and switch. I'm going to, Dr. Risch, McGinley's back on. Do you mind if I put your question on hold?
Sure.
Okay. So, Dr. McGinley, can you talk to us about your and Professor Weise's experiences in Ukraine?
Sure. My original experience was when West Virginia University's College of Law developed a sister school relationship with Donetsk State University in the Donbass. That was 1991. And that relationship, I think because of costs of transportation, didn't last too long, but we had an opportunity to travel to Donetsk. I was with my dean and associate dean, and we had an opportunity to visit coal mines there and to get out in the countryside. So we got a little sense of the Ukrainian steppes and the region and the importance of coal mining. I think that was the reason that our law school tried to develop the relationship with Donetsk State University. And then subsequently, I joined the American Bar Association CELI program, Central and Eastern European Law Initiative, and began traveling there to Western Ukraine, to Ivano-Frankivsk and Lviv in, I think it was 1996. And I developed relationships with lawyers from the region, but especially from Ukraine. And subsequently, Suzanne and I became involved with a public interest law firm in Lviv, Environment People Law. I'm currently on the board of directors, and that's how I've had connections since the war started with our friends at EPL. And I can report that the women have left with their children to Poland, to Hungary. The men and their family are still there, as generally reported. The director of the program is with her husband in the outskirts southwest of Kiev, and they're involved in medical supplies. I'm concerned about them. I haven't heard from them recently, but that's not, at least what we see on cable news, the maps, that's not a Russian-occupied territory, but of course we're concerned. And we are getting some messages from our friends who have left Ukraine and are in contact with their family in Kiev. And of course, I mean, that's about all that we know.
I was just going to add to that. We are a friend of ours who's in the United States. His niece is there, and actually he has a bank account set up so that people can put money into it, and she's able to access it so that she can buy supplies, and she's still able to use an ATM, which kind of is amazing when you think about everything that's going on. But so there are ways that I know for people like us who want to help, you can help by getting money to people to get supplies within Ukraine.
Yeah, I was kind of stunned that ATMs are still working in the vicinity of Kiev. And I assume they are in Lviv, but where life is not as disrupted as in Kiev. So that's basically the context that we have currently.
And you mentioned also in a previous conversation that we had, welcome Slav. You also mentioned in a previous conversation about how you were cooperating with people on the environmental front too. Can you talk about some of the those connections?
Well, that's EPL is Environment People Law, and the ABA CELI program was an outreach program at the fall of the Soviet Union, attempting to assist lawyers and people in the legal profession and those who teach law in Ukraine and other Central European countries, basically reaching out and sharing our particular system of law. And of course, they were interested in how national laws could evolve away from the Soviet system. For example, the concept of owning property, real property, seemed to be foreign when we first went there. And we talked about property law and rights of ownership, and that was a new concept. But as time went on, the lawyers in the region and in Ukraine really understood the power of the law and a justice system, and in those countries, as in the U.S., it's not perfect, but our observations were that lawyers there were making a real effort to utilize the law to bring justice. One of the focuses of their work, and it related to environmental issues. I teach environmental law, and that's the access of citizens to government information. Ukraine joined the Aarhus Convention on Access to Public Information. It was a European convention, and one of the most important things in a democracy is transparency. So issues of transparency and access to information were an important part of the work of the lawyers that we were involved with in Ukraine.
And I imagine that was this kind of like a workshop that you were doing? Were you guys giving lectures, or was it informal discussions?
Well, at first it was the connection with ABA, but then lawyers in the region and in Ukraine took the initiative themselves. And so we went there, and Suzanne went with me several times at the invitation of law professors in Lviv and in Kiev to hold workshops about access to information, about environmental assessments, a concept that was new, and it's fairly new in the U.S., if you can call 30 years or 40 years new. So those workshops addressed students, law students and lawyers. Some of them, they were held in the Carpathians outside of Lviv, one outside of a place called Guta, outside of Ivano-Frankivsk. And so we had both lawyers and law students, and a quite large group of participants. There were lawyers who were interested in doing this kind of work from all over Ukraine, especially eastern Ukraine. That's how we got we felt very strongly that the representations that the people in eastern Ukraine wanted to be part of Russia and would welcome Russian the Russian invasion to be absurd, because even though they may be primarily Russian speakers, they had allegiance to Ukraine. Ukraine is, contrary to what the Russians are saying, is a real country with a real history, although there's so much conflict, and the people of Ukraine have had to deal with so much for so many centuries. But by the time of the fall of the Soviet Union and the new Ukraine, people had a very strong, I don't know how to put it exactly, a strong feeling that it was absolutely necessary to embrace democracy. So we were there in 2004 in Kiev after Maidan, and then when we were there in 2014, that we were there just a couple of months before the Russian takeover of Crimea, and the sense of national identity was throughout that time, even before the Russian incursion, from the beginning, was very strong, and that the sense of the importance of democracy and the connection to Europe has been there since over the 30 years that I've been going there.
Well, so it seems like there's some overlap actually between your experience and Dr. Rish's research too, and his experience there, because that's the period that you're talking about in your latest book, correct?
Yes. I actually, if you wanted to get a little bit about my personal information, I mean, I lived in Lviv, Ukraine from 1998 to 2000, and then from 2002 to 2004. The first period I was doing dissertation research for my book. Second period, I was teaching at the National University there for the Civic Education Project. And then I was there in Ukraine later on for the Euromaidan in December 2013 in Kyiv. And at the encouragement of colleagues, I went to Donetsk and Kharkiv in January 2014 and came back to Kyiv right as the violence started at the protests camp. And I'll never forget that because it was a night where I was on one part of the block where it was all peaceful, and then on the other part of the block, that's where they were throwing grenades and Molotov cocktails, and that's when everything started on January the 19th, 2014. But the research that I've been doing for this book, I think it is very important to realize that, to acknowledge that those identities of being European or Western and not Russian have been contested. And if you look at polling information for Ukraine as a whole in the fall of 2013, most did not support closer ties with the European Union. In fact, it was a slight majority that opposed it. With the Euromaidan protests, much of this was about the signing of an association agreement with the EU, and that plan was reconsidered by Ukraine's government. And that's what led to those protests. And if you do look at the polling from 2013 through 2014, the population remains split over this issue and over the fate of the regime of President Viktor Yanukovych. In fact, when it came to those willing to vote for Viktor Yanukovych, those numbers around 29%, 28% didn't really change through the course of the whole protests. And what I noticed in Donetsk, in the survey work that I did, however brief it was that there were people that felt that the events in Kiev were part of a power grab that was quite cynical, and then there were some people that said we resent the idea of being told that we need to be Europeans in a certain way and that we know more about Europe than some of these protesters do. Similar sentiments came from Kharkiv. And I can say that the protests were definitely legitimate, and we're talking about a regime that was unprecedented in its acts of corruption, where the Yanukovych family and the extended family, including associates of President Yanukovych, they enriched themselves and became overnight billionaires. The problem remained with what was Ukraine supposed to do. And the political leaders of the Maidan in Kyiv were quite indecisive, really, and were afraid of what these protesters would do. And honestly, the protesters and the politicians that represented them, they were at odds with each other constantly, and others, including sociologists, have pointed this out. And there was a spiral of violence that ultimately the state definitely played a role in this by suppressing all protests on January the 16th with a number of laws passed against protests, known as the dictatorship laws. That violence, though, did produce uprisings in the center and west of Ukraine, where protesters took over regional state administration buildings and blocked in riot police barracks. And there was a backlash by Yanukovych supporters in the south and east, cracking down on potential protests as those and creating their own counter-protest movement, often called the anti-Maidan, that after Yanukovych's flight from Ukraine became the basis for this protest movement that sometimes they called it anti-Maidan. Then the Russians got involved very vigorously and called it Russian Spring, and you've got Russian nationalists from across the border and Russians claiming close ties to the Kremlin who are trying to manage all these counter-protests. And The thing was that in the south of Ukraine, that counter-protest movement was quite weak. In Kharkiv, it was probably 50-50. In Odessa, probably 50-50. And in the Donbass, the problem was that you had a political elite that was playing around with the idea of separatism to gain political concessions from Kyiv. And then you had police forces and security forces there, which were beholden to the local elites, and they switched sides and played around with the Russian separatists, talked about how Putin needed to send in troops. And they are responsible, as well as the Russians are responsible, for the Donbass war that started. And Ukraine tried to respond first with a limited security operation, limited to the cities of Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. And then it escalated as President Poroshenko, Petro Poroshenko, when he became president, he promised to end this crisis, and he did send in more security forces. He proposed various ceasefires, but by July the 1st, he decided to go to war with these people, and that initially produced great successes. The separatists were driven out of Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, but they regrouped in other parts of the Donbass closer to Russia, and they got Russian military help. And soon regular Russian military came in, and they crushed the Ukrainian forces in August and early September of 2014. And that's where we get the first Minsk Accords, as they're called, signed September the 5th. And then the war raged on after that. And then there was a second set of Minsk Accords in mid-February, promising a ceasefire on February the 15th, actually. But not before the Russians took over, well, the separatists and the Russians took over the Donetsk airport and the town of Debaltseve, a key railroad hub in the Donbass. And after that, there was more or less a positional war between the two sides, which sometimes there was a lot of heavy gunfire and artillery fire between the two sides, but then it died down. And under Zelensky, when he was elected president in 2019, the fighting had largely ceased. And then, well, there were problems with that the Zelensky administration had with Russia and with opponents of the so-called Minsk Accords that led to Zelensky cracking down on pro-Russian elements in Ukraine and refusing to give in to the Minsk Accords, refusing to implement them. And I think that's in part why Putin saw at least justification to invade. Ultimately, though, it never really seemed to me, I don't want to digress too far, but this goes beyond my book, of course. But if you look at what happened by the time we get to 2021, we have a situation where Russia is constantly making that threat of invasion, but people stopped taking it seriously. There was a major Ukrainian think tank run by the former Minister of Defense. Zahorodnyuk, I think is his last name. I can't remember, but Alina Frolovna, a person I knew at one time, she was in it. And that report they did in January of 2022 suggested that the likelihood of a massive invasion was very low. The likelihood of Russia trying to occupy Ukraine was very low, but there would be a serious problem of some escalation. And that escalation occurred.
Thank you.
I think you're muted.
Thanks so much for that breakdown, and especially because there's a lot of detail in there, and that's what I think we're missing a lot of times in the news media, is that we don't understand the backstory and the nuances and the geography, and the different political parties and interests that are involved in this. Victor, did you want to ask any questions of either of our guests so far?
Sure. I have we're waiting on another guest to join in. I will introduce her. But meanwhile, thank you, Dr. Risch, for the historical perspective. History spins so fast that 2014 seems like Bronze Age today.
Yeah.
But the players also change. And it is, I think, consensus all over the world that Zelensky emerges as a nation's leader. He didn't run away like Afghanistan president. He is not yet killed like Salvador Allende or many others. He is not imprisoned like Dubček in 1968. So he became, whether history planned it or not, a leader of the nation. And I must say a Churchill of our times. I give him credit. But he is also spun in different ways by different interested factions. One interesting perspective I hear, maybe you can say a couple of words on this. My family is Jewish. We're Russian-speaking Jews from Ukraine, which makes us share identity with millions of Americans, by the way. So I hear from many Jewish friends in Israel, America, Europe, religious, not Russian, not, that this is not our fight because Ukrainians helped Nazis to kill us. I tell them that their semantics is all mixed up, that history is about change. Some people even vote for it. I'm an evolutionary scientist. I deal of scales of millions of years, but now we see change which happens overnight or even faster. So words like Russian, Ukrainian, Jewish do not Nazi do not describe, never actually describe reality well, and do not describe it now as it changes. So I coined some formulas which help me briefly explain to my students and friends what is going on. And when they tell me that Zelensky is a Jew who turned Nazi, I heard it more than once from Russia coming now. Americans can only reply that a Jew cannot be a Nazi, which is not an adequate answer. So what type of, as a historian, what type of a little bit deeper explanation explaining allegiances and situation and the change would a professional historian offer?
Yeah, thank you very much, Victor, for your question. The thing is that in my own research on Ukrainian nationalism post-war, the one thing is that in order to discredit any sort of national dissent in post-war Soviet Ukraine, you were immediately labeled a Banderite, a follower of Stepan Bandera, whose Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists was, to some degree, complicit in the Holocaust, and that's been documented by the historian John Paul Himka very extensively. And this included the defense of the Ukrainian language or greater freedom for the Ukrainian literature. And the late Ivan Dzyuba, for instance, he was a literary critic and a dissident who actually died the day before the invasion started. His book, Internationalism or Russification, he gave some examples of that from Kiev from the mid-1960s, where mothers would say on the tram, for instance, hey, my kid is studying under a Banderite. Isn't that funny? Or there was a torchlit parade to honor the anniversary of the birth of poet Lesya Ukrainka, who died in, I believe, 1913. Maybe it was the 50th anniversary of her death. And supposedly there were some onlookers who said, I didn't know we had so many Banderites in Kiev. So this identification with the far right, it's been there in Soviet discourse for some time, and then it just sort of went on in post-Soviet Ukraine, in independent Ukraine. So the problem is you do have that concept being used to discredit one's political opponents. I mean, there are far-right groups in Ukraine, for sure. The degree to which they're anti-Semitic, it's hard to say. It often seems to me that some of these far-right groups are more, they've sort of taken on different enemies, such as people of color, Africans, South Asians who are there in Ukraine, Syrian refugees, however few there are in Ukraine, or those from the LGBT community, or leftists. They seem to be the enemies that should be done away with or removed from Ukraine. But it almost seems like when it comes to the Jewish community, there's been an effort to court the favor of the Jews and to praise those Jews who are on the national side. I mean, sometimes there have been anecdotal outbursts, but only when it's someone who's Jewish that some nationalist doesn't like. I mean, there was this case with Yuri Bereza, I believe is his name. He was from the right sector, and he's Jewish, and somebody from the far right party, Svoboda, got mad when Yuri Bereza, I believe it was, left that party, left right sector, and he used his real Jewish name in some angry Facebook post. But this is also someone from Svoboda who praises the Jewish state, who praises Israel and their actions to defend its freedom and so on, their freedom and so on. So I would say maybe sometimes it surfaces incidentally, but I don't think it's primarily the focus of Ukraine's organized far right. There are problems with the desecration of Jewish monuments periodically, but sometimes it's somebody paid for it. Some people say it's from Russian provocateurs, but it's hard to say, it's hard to prove. There was some recent article in Rolling Stone, of all places, that suggested that there were some people in Kharkiv that were trying to do this to discredit Ukrainian political forces. And something happened with the money, and this operation didn't happen where they were supposed to paint swastikas all over Kharkiv.
I'm sure there's a lot of false flags we do not see or are naive to not notice. I need to introduce our guest who just joined in, and we agreed to give her preference. This is Anya Formozova. Anya, do we have you on camera?
Unfortunately, it looks like I don't have Microsoft Teams, so
Okay.
I can't be on camera, but if you give me a couple minutes, I can try to download it.
Well, yes, we can. We would like to see your face, of course. Please, Chris.
In the process, I was going to say, Professor Weise has a question.
Yes, please. Question to the speaker.
It's a question that Professor Weise and I both have. First of all, I just make an observation. Professor Risch discussion about the right in Ukraine. You could be talking about the United States. We have, there are racists, there are anti-Semites who are active in the United States. And I think if you look all over Europe, I mean, this is not new to human experience. And the fact that there may be anti-Semitism in Ukraine is exploited by those who can profit from it. I mean, that was part of the plan of Putin during the 2016 election, and continues to be the Russian plan of splitting different interests along ethnic and religious lines in Europe and in the United States. That's the observation. My question is for Dr. Risch and everyone else is that what I didn't hear in your discussion of the history, Dr. Risch, is the influence of the Soviet Union post-1991. There was Russian influence. I mean, there was existing influence because of the hierarchy and the bureaucracy that basically inherited the government. And so you didn't address, and you or others can address this, but Russia was always working to influence Ukraine from 1991 forward. And it seemed to me, from our context and our traveling in Ukraine, that as Ukraine slowly democratized, and there was corruption, but that corruption is really, it seemed to us, linked to the kind of corruption that was present in the Soviet Union and in the Soviet bloc. So I'm just wondering if someone, Dr. Risch or someone else can fill in the gap there about the continuing Russian influence. And there were those who grew up in the Soviet Union, in Ukraine as part of the Soviet Union, who knew that as the way to go forward, to gain power. And it seems to me that's an element of what has gone on and was part of the, this really lurching effort of Ukraine toward democracy, and maybe the rejection of Russian influence.
Yeah, can I go ahead and answer? Yeah, I really liked Dr. Weise's observation as well as the question. So regarding the observation with the United States, I think, to be perfectly honest, I think the far right is much better organized and financed and well armed in the United States compared to Ukraine. The one problem that maybe my friends would say exists in Ukraine, and some colleagues might agree, is that there hasn't been sort of the counter force, an anti-fascist movement that could sort of call out some of these people for their abuses, those who belong to the far right. And I think the problem with that is that if you look at what has happened with Ukrainian politics, is that definitely since the Euromaidan, there may be earlier events too, but you do see where there were elements in the far right that became important allies with what we would call national liberals in their struggle against Yanukovych, and they sort of had no choice but to stick together and be united, or else their protest movement would have been brutally crushed by Yanukovych's security forces. And that continues during the so-called Russian Spring and the Donbass War, where the first people who stood up and said, we're going to fight, were from the far right. And how could you deny them their service to the country? So they're very much entwined. It's hard to go against the people that are the only ones sometimes sticking their necks out to fight for Ukraine. The problem is that it's now much more complicated because you do have regular Ukrainian military who are doing much more of the work, one could argue, although this is the problem with Azov. And the Azov battalion in Mariupol, Azov battalion was organized by people who were neo-Nazis and still, well, they won't tell you that, but you've got Andrei Biletsky, okay, who was and is a neo-Nazi, okay? And the problem is that they've been absorbed into the state security system, the National Guard, and in that sense, the National Guard, I think, was trying to sort of head off the influence and not allow for an army within an army to form in Ukraine. There's got to be some way to control these people, and maybe that was a good thing that they did. But the problem is that Putin and these propagandists can easily point to them and say, hey, look, Mariupol's being defended by Nazis. This is why we're here. There was that other question about the corruption, yes, and the Russian ties. I mean, the reality was that when the Soviet Union disintegrated, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine were very closely connected, and there were these business ties. There was no real border between Ukraine and Russia, as far as I can tell, and travel was quite free, and the business ties were there. The security ties were there. It was sort of common knowledge that the SBU was really connected to the FSB in Russia, and that you couldn't really trust those people. The Russian military, and when the war broke out in 2014, there were questions about who was really loyal to Ukraine and who was leaking information to the Russians. And that was a serious problem and then you've got the political ties. And some of these ties that were, we could call them pro-Russian, they were very closely connected to oligarchs in Russia itself. In general, yes, these business ties, these oligarch ties, you look at the gas industry, you look at the oil and gas industry, and Ukraine has this transit country for Russian gas. And so those corruption schemes did link the Ukrainians to the Russians. And some of the opposition parties that we would call from the left, the Communist Party of Ukraine or the Progressive Socialist Party of Ukraine or the Socialist Party of Ukraine, yes, they had certain ties with Russian interests too.
Thank you, Dr. Risch. I wanted to introduce now our guest from New York, from Brooklyn. This is Anya Formozova. I'm very honored to have her on our panel. She is a daughter of my old friend, zoologist Nikolai Formozov, and she's helping people on the ground in Ukraine. Anya, please tell us anything you want.
Hi, thank you so much. That's a very sweet introduction, and thank you for having me. It's really nice to meet all of you. I have been working for the last 24 days with an organization. It's a very, very, very grassroots organization called Помогаем уехать, or Helping to Leave. It's basically just a bunch of Russians, mostly in Georgia, who did a lot of work. I mean, it's complete chaos, but they did so much in like a week. There's software, there's coders who built a bot. People speak to us through this bot. It asks them a couple of questions. Then live people like us pick up the conversation. And what we do is we help coordinate evacuations, right? So I'm subscribed to like 1,000 different Telegram chats. Every city in Ukraine has an evacuation chat. If I don't know the answer to a question, I try to get people to answer it for me there. For example, yesterday I had to answer the question, what specifically happens in a bus when you're crossing the border? Like, how exactly do they check your documents? Do they make you get out? Do they, you know what I mean? And it's very doable. We look at like the map with all of the, the army movements map. I don't actually know how to say that in English. We have access to a lot of volunteers. We have massive databases that other people in our group have collected, and they constantly call people and try to find drivers that are real and drivers that aren't scammers. We do a lot of different things. And the goal of our organization is to get people from different parts of Ukraine to the border. And then at the border already, there is so much humanitarian aid. There are so many volunteers. The problem is just that there's a lack of people helping within the country, obviously, because it's so dangerous. So that is what we do. And I guess the point of me being invited here was so I could sort of pitch you this organization a little bit. I'd love to send you links to, I think they only have an Instagram account because that's how new they are, I guess. They have a website too. I'll send you the links if you don't mind. I also started my own little kind of side hustle because unfortunately all the money that was donated to this organization got stuck in Russia because Visa and MasterCard pulled out of Russia, right? So basically I also started sending people money directly to people that I was talking to through the bot. So there's also that option. So I guess my main pitch is I would love if you took a look at the organization I work for. If you have time, if you're interested, they post stories of individual Ukrainians they helped on their Instagram. And I would love if you looked at that. And then if you want to, if you want to like have a direct story from me about a specific person you helped, you could send me money directly, but that's only temporarily till the organization's financial aid department opens again. So that's what I have to say. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Do you have a few minutes to hang with us to answer some questions?
Of course. Yes.
Please,
thank you.
I invite everyone in chat or live ask questions because we rarely have direct pipeline to people who actually help people on the ground in Ukraine. And this is very important for us to understand what kind of logistic help is required, because unfortunately our news do not report about black marketeers and scamming and things which are going on. We work with another group, we have connection with another group of paramedics from US who are on Polish border on the other side, trying to distribute medical supplies which are coming from Europe. And they basically have to hire their own drivers and guards and ship those in private vehicles to hospitals over Ukraine because of speed and logistics. So please, I saw the question whether this takes PayPal. I think you gave me a PayPal number for the organization. It's on our website already. So everyone who wants to donate or do separate fundraising, then please. So please more questions.
I was also hoping we have another guest on who has been with us for the past few panels, whose name is a professor here, Dr. Slav Grachev. Slav, did you want to add anything?
He's here.
First of all, I wanted to make sure that you can see me and hear
Yes.
me.
We do.
Thank you for inviting me, Chris. Well, I will tell you some kind of a personal story, and there's a direct connection with what is going on. My children, who are of course very interested in observing the situation, often say how lucky we are that we are so far away from there. And I say, you know, nobody is too far away. Everyone will be affected one way or the other. So yes, we are kind of lucky, but we still will be affected. And I will tell you, this is what actually just recently happened as an example. I had a contract to publish my historic novel about the Soviet Union of the period of Brezhnev and Andropov, so which I'm basically just finalizing right now. And I had a contract with one of the biggest publishers in Russia. I kind of forgot how to translate it into English. NLO, new editor. Yes, you probably know this, right, Professor Risch?
Yes.
Okay.
New literary review, yes.
Correct, new literary review. So I had a contract and agreement with them to publish my novel, and we were supposed to start practically the whole process in the summer. And I spoke to them just recently, and I said they are afraid. They practically just step back from this because they are not sure what's going to happen if they publish this particular novel. They said we may face prosecution. So of course my novel is political, is romantic, is historic, but yes, I'm very critical about communists of that time, but they still, you can imagine what kind of dictatorship right now we are dealing with. Right? So see, this is the direct effect which we already are experiencing here in West Virginia. So we cannot hide from the war. We have to be aware of this. And this is what I'm teaching my children. So, and another little point, on YouTube last year, I was presenting for West Virginia Humanities Council. They asked my guest speaker lecture about modernism under the Soviet regime. So it was going pretty well in terms of the views, but you will not believe in the past months there was a augmented by more than 1,000 views in just 1 month. Right now getting closer to 2,000 views altogether. Mm-hmm. For the whole year it was about 500 or 600, something like this, and in 1 month 1,000. So you can imagine the interest in the topic in Russia, in Soviet Union, in all these dictatorship things, in everything what is going on is probably just skyrocketing. So I think that's why you're doing a great job helping people to understand and answer questions. Everybody have questions now. So thank you.
Thank you, Slav. We are in a very small state, one of the smallest, but this means our academic institutions are more visible at the state level. We have the same 2 senators as every state has. And we hope, by the way, that they are watching what we are doing. We are not far from Charleston, our capital, and not far from Morgantown. I thank colleagues from Morgantown for joining. As I said, I'm a native of Ukraine. I'm proud I am, although my mother's folks lived there, but I never lived there permanently and don't know the language well. But just like many people in the U.S., I'm proud to identify with the fighters of Ukraine today. If I may, Anya, can you tell us more about, maybe a few minutes about these people you are helping? What are the types of people, stories, events?
Yeah, yes. So they, unfortunately, it sound too bad to be true, because the fact is that the people who had the funds and the ability to leave without our help have already left. And I don't want to sound like as depressing as I'm about to sound, but it's just been getting worse, because initially I started this work and immediately made me feel much better mentally, because I was just doing it all day and I was like, we're doing it, we're getting it done, you know. But now there are more and more cities where when people ask us, how do I leave? We say, you cannot, you have to stay in the cellar. And there are more and more, you know, horrible situations where it's like, how do you evacuate a cancer ward, a children's cancer ward? Sorry, I mean, this is just all really dark, but those are the issues that we're working with right now. And we're not we're trying to requalify ourselves, right? So at the beginning, it was very easy. We just had to figure out the routes. We would like look up information for people about trains, about buses, about drivers, about documents. It was like all very Googleable. And now it's turning into this sort of, for example, let me give you some examples. 4 days ago, this woman, Rita Makowiecka, wrote in our bot, and she said, I'm in Dnieper. My daughter is in Trestiniec, which is a small city near in Sumskaya Oblast, in Sumskaya region, which is not a great place to be right now at all, as I'm sure you know. And she said, my daughter called me during the day. She said her water broke. She was crying. She called me from a neighbor's phone, and now I can't reach her. And this is because Trestiniec is like in direct attack right now, and they destroyed the MTS tower. So there's no cell phone connection, and even if there was cell phone connection, like there's no electricity or water, so there's no phones. So this girl, this woman, she's 32 years old, she found someone who had a phone during the day, called her mother to tell her that her water had broken, and then since then, no one has been able to get in touch with her. We haven't been able to, her mother has not. It's been 4 days. The only good news is that this woman has already has 5 children. So I was thinking maybe if you've had 5 children, maybe the 6th one just like comes right out. Sorry, not to be crass, but like everything gets very funny after. Like I personally like laugh a lot, like nervously, because a lot of these stories are quite, I don't know. Anyway, so that's an example of something we're working with. We called every single doctor. We called every single phone number we could find in the area of Trestiniec that nobody has connection. We wrote into a group chat of people from Trestiniec. Obviously, all the people in that group chat are not physically in their city because they wouldn't be in the chat if they were in the city. Yesterday, I called a bunch of volunteers in Achtyrka, which is close to there, and I finally got, like, actually both of them picked up. But of course, they were like, no, we can't go to Trestiniec. That's all to say that the cases we're working with are harder and harder. But there are good ones, too. For example, I was talking to this woman named Kateryna. Her mom needs dialysis. So every 2-3 days, she needs to be in a hospital. It takes days and days to get out of Ukraine. So they had to figure out a way to move in like short stops and make sure that she would have a place that would give her free dialysis every time she needed it. And they did it. Like we sent them some money. They got a nice like expensive bus to Poland. And then they went straight to the little city they found with free dialysis. And now, I mean, they're very relieved. I mean, they're still in a terrible situation, but they're out and they're available medical supplies and things are okay. Those are 2 stories. I have lots of stories, but those are 2 examples.
I asked about Mariupol. I didn't know if you had knew anything more about that, if your organization is able to do anything with that.
We have, so this is one of the things we're trying to do right now. We were just talking about that today, actually, is that we need specialization, right? Because it's not enough just now to be more or less aware of all the ways to get out. So we now are trying to develop like a specialized group. The only people we know so far, the only 2 ways we know so far of getting out of Mariupol is there's the government sanctioned sort of green corridors. Unfortunately, green corridor doesn't mean much nowadays, apparently, as you know, because people were still attacked. There's that. And then there's this Israeli group. There's a huge group of Israeli volunteers who are organizing buses from a bunch of the very severely affected cities. So what we're trying to do is every time someone writes us from Mariupol, we write down their contacts, and then we tell them that we keep them abreast of like the green corridors and whether they're functional or not. And we are trying to like make them into groups together and get them onto those Israeli buses. And then the third thing we do is we try to, because sometimes people, if you have your own car, you can leave behind the buses in the green corridor, which is much safer than trying to leave on your own. So what we try to do is we try to make sure that if someone has a spot in their car, we fill it. So those are the things we're doing about Mariupol. I don't know. I mean, I just have more horror stories for you. Like I talked to a guy, he and his girlfriend got out there in Melitopol. They got out of Mariupol 2 days ago. And he was like, my girlfriend loses her mind whenever the fridge turns on because like any abrupt sound, you know, she clearly is deeply traumatized. And I said, you know, we have a lot of psychologists on staff. And he was like, no, thank you. We don't need any psychologists because there's massive anti-psychology stigma in most of Eastern Europe. And honestly, we keep offering everyone psychologists and everyone's like, no, it's cool. And so now I've tried calling them, and now I call psychologists consultants, war zone support consultants, because I hope that won't trigger people into like declining. So those are some stories.
Thank you so much for telling us about this. I think we would really benefit from hearing from you again, too, to see how this is progressing. It sounds like a great organization.
It's definitely very hands-on, you know.
Who is what size of group are we talking right now? Do you have more volunteers coming in?
We when I started like 4 weeks ago, there were maybe 40 people, and then now there's 200 of the operators, but I think not all of them work every day. Obviously, not everyone has the free time to be able to do this every day. The people who organize this definitely do this every day and like 24/7. I don't know what their day jobs are. Clearly, they're like on a break from them. Yeah, at the moment, I think we've closed. We're not accepting any more volunteers at the moment. Also, all the volunteers speak Russian. Like you have to, obviously. But donations are. I also, by the way, I just want to take it back. I think if you do want to donate, please donate to the organization, because I got some money and then it turned out it's very overwhelming. Like I already have too much money basically that I know what to. Like I just need to send that out first, and then I'll, you know. But the organization does need money, and they're very good at distributing it most of the time.
We do have the link. If this is the only link you provided, we have it on our website, and we will repeat to our viewers. And I hope more people will watch this in recording. We don't have so many live participants right now, but it is on our website along with all previous sessions. And we will be meeting here every Friday. So, Anya, if you can distribute our address and this link, it will be permanent, and we will be happy to first hear from people anywhere, even from those who are already in Europe, who have experience, and to participate in fundraising as much as we can. Tell us one thing more, please. I am interested myself. Young people like this other group of paramedics from America that we deal with, are there organized efforts right now in New York, for example, for people to go over there to Ukraine, to Poland, or these are all just individual initiatives?
I don't know about humanitarian efforts. I know that there was an organized effort for veterans to go to Ukraine, and I know a veteran who went and is there now fighting. And that was an organized, like there was 3,000 American veterans who went, and he was one of them. I do not, to be honest, I don't know. I've been looking, but if you find something, please let me know, because I'd be interested in working with also non-Russian organizations.
We are trying to be liaisons for many things, and everything we find we will put on blog section on our website. There is only one website with many many tabs on it. But this is on Marshall University, Ukraine website, and we want everyone to distribute it because we're trying to help us as much as we can. Thank you so much. Please stay with us if you wish, and I'm sure we have more questions here. We do not usually put end time on this, but we will be here every week from 3 p.m. Eastern on. And thank you all for joining. I'm sure we have, and guests may have more questions. I see some very, very good guests, my friends, right now. Please join in with questions or comments.
I have a question in the chat. One thing that's concerned me is media coverage in the United States, which shows evacuation routes and supply routes. And I get very frustrated because I'm concerned that this would create targets for the Russian military. And I just wanted to get your view on that.
Or anyone.
Or anyone for that matter. Sorry.
If that was addressed to, well, my opinion is that that's an excellent question, and I know this from the veteran actually, that there were 2 times when areas were hit that either had supplies of, I mean, this is actually in the news. It's not even remotely a secret, but there was a hit on near Lvov, a base that had foreign troops training and also foreign weapons. I know maybe you've read about that, and that's a tragedy. Like, that's a tragedy because obviously that would be a target, and I don't understand why foreign troops were training right next to piles of foreign weapons. Like, I think those 2 things should be separate because the weapons are something they're always going to be trying to destroy. I honestly don't know the answer to that question though. Like, I don't. Yeah.
Did you have something?
Anyone else, please?
Yeah, I had a question about Instagram. Is that a safe way to communicate from here to people in Ukraine?
Do you mean if you directly speak to someone in Ukraine via Instagram?
Yes.
I personally don't talk to anyone directly in Ukraine through Instagram. Our organization has an Instagram account for sort of PR purposes. We only speak to Ukrainians through the chat bot that our guys built and through Telegram. Telegram is like the safest, more or less, option, although it still obviously can be infiltrated very easily because if you're in a large evacuation chat, people can just join who are like work for the FSB or whatever. Yeah, so I don't know about the safety of that. I know that people, like, if I ask someone for a geolocation because I need to prove they're in Ukraine to send them money, I would only do that on Telegram. And then I usually just delete it immediately after.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I wanted to address another question here, which we didn't talk about, obviously. It's not a priority for us, but of course it's a question which people are asking me from Russia and about Russia. Honestly, last week, I personally was advising to all people I know in Russia, educated people, to get out. But I was told yesterday, I haven't looked at verifiable estimates, I heard that 250,000 Russians left recently, of them 70,000 computer people, IT people. If this continues, it will definitely play against Putin's plans because he won't even have people to wage cyber war. So if anyone has anything to add on this, to comment, because as obvious thing would be for Russian government to close the borders very soon. I know that already passing through the border is sometimes a problem. You can be stopped and returned by whatever reason. I heard this. And obviously they don't report much of this, but anecdotally we hear these things. and they flee to all directions: Israel, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Thailand, obviously.
I would doubt the accuracy of that report. Not that there aren't professionals from various occupations that are leaving Russia, but the exactness of 70,000 of 250,000 of computer programmers, that sounds like too exact to be reliable. But there's no doubt that people who have the means and possibilities, either in the West or other places, are leaving. And that's a brain drain. We've experienced that in West Virginia, right? But it's a different story there. And the effect is, as you've suggested, that's what Putin would want.
Yes, I sort of wonder, on that note, there may be this brain drain, but yet I'm not sure what to make of these opinion polls that suggest, for instance, that 71% of Russian citizens approve of the current military operation, and that there are at least some journalists who anecdotally are mentioning that there are cases of funerals for soldiers in which the family members seem to be, well, let's put it this way, they blame NATO and the West rather than Russia's leaders.
This is quite common. I don't need to bring any old Soviet jokes about this, but this has been going for millennia, if not more. That's not an issue. But I agree with Dr. Ish that official polls are not reliable. Remember 1991, when no one who voted for communist leaders came to defend them. And the same will happen again. It's just the old story, but we don't need this commentary here much, it's obvious. But military-wise, does anyone of our viewers listeners have any questions? Anya, thank you very much for your comments. Thank you.
It was really lovely to see you and speak to you. Goodbye. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Anya.
This was extremely moving, and I think we need to follow up on this group and link and make it a kind of not to forget about it. You see, we're trying to fundraising here with this Dr. Gruber's group and other groups, but there's so much going on that we are scattered, and I would rather support direct groups. As I told you, Anya is daughter of my very old friend, where we know each other for 50 years, and these are people you can trust immediately. She graduated from Moscow Higher School of Economics as some kind of business person, and it breaks my heart to see what is going on in this part of the world. And again, history teaches us that, well, I guess some people can take lessons from it.
And this is very pertinent too, because the announcement that the U.S. is going to accept 100,000 Ukrainian refugees too.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that program, Dr. Risch?
Not yet. I am going to be following it because I do also know people who are interested in taking in refugees.
We do too, and this was my question too. If somebody will find exact conditions and documentation, please tell us, because I am already asked by the local people who want to take in a family.
I sort of have to say that as a historian, I do wonder, when will the needle move when it comes to Russian popular opinion? Because clearly Russia has always been an admirer of the West, but also a rival of the West, and sometimes has been very suspicious of the West. to what extent will the bubble burst on this this sort of alternative reality that's been created by media and propaganda?
I can comment on this because I was raised in Soviet Union. I came to this country when I was 33. No, I don't agree that Russia, even whatever you mean by Russia, was always fascinated by the West. No, that's not true. They wanted Western technology, from Peter the Great cannons to iPhones. But they didn't want Western freedom, responsibility, transparency, and privacy. There is no, as you know, there is no translation for privacy in Russian. The best translation is not your business.
Yeah.
I'm not saying about any genetic codes or historical heritage, but it's very easy to mold populace, especially with modern media means, which Goebbels couldn't dream about.
Yeah.
And very fast, too. Plus, I don't want to get historiosophical here, but I don't think the bubble will burst easily. It can last for generations. We might be prepared for a long winter. You know the word ottipel, the thaw, which was characterizing post-Stalin era. Recently, I started thinking that this was an illusion, that this wasn't a thaw. It was just an Indian summer before another long winter, a little bit of sun showing up. In this said, I hope Ukraine will win soon and will be helped by the whole world.
Yeah.
We need to watch those who will want to invest fast and hard into it for corruption. And Russia will not. So we're facing very interesting, for historians, if they will exist, very interesting events which cannot be extremely prolonged in terms of active military conflict. It will not be 1914, 1919. It just cannot be. The points of no return are passed every hour. So how long can the world be desensitized by Mariupol-like images? I mean, it's like watching Hiroshima on live TV developing.
Do you mind if I make a comment and a question, actually, for anybody who's out there? Anara, Stefan, Chuck Gruber, Dr. Risch, professors up in WVU too. Maybe some of you are familiar with Samantha Power's book, A Problem from Hell, and where she basically makes the case that throughout the 20th century, the United States pretty much consistently fails to stop genocides. She uses genocide as the standard, but and I'm not going to use that term for Ukraine, but she uses smaller engagements as well, wars, to basically say the United States gets involved when we absolutely have to. If you look at both world wars, those are examples. We get in kind of on the tail end when it's actually affecting us, and then all the cases of genocide throughout the 20th century, we tend to get involved in the margins. You know, Rwanda, the case of Bosnia as well. It's kind of on the margins. We come in 1999 with Kosovo a little bit, but that's after already 200,000 Muslims have been killed by the Serbs. And so I just wonder to what extent that might be guiding our policy in Ukraine as well. I know we're involved, but it seems that historically we tend not to get that much involved until we're absolutely being threatened.
Isn't that human nature? I mean, historically, I mean, if people, whether it's a microcosm of community dealing with toxic pollution approved by the government, or whether it's international relations and nation states fighting each other, it's not until their interest, and especially the interest of those who are making the decision. In democracy, it's Americans. And we had Fortress America and isolationism before our entry into the Second World War, but it was clear what was going on from 1930, and what really earlier than that. There was this very strong movement for us not to be involved. But I think if you look from a historical perspective, you're going to find that that's not unusual. It's not an American trait. It's something that is human in the sense that we don't want to be involved. We don't see that we're not there. But now, what's different now is we're seeing it every day on TV. That made a difference in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War, for Americans. That made a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also you have to consider the fact that, well, one, yes, there is the media coverage. There is the fact that we're so entangled in Russia's affairs, as we've seen with the 2016 elections. The other problem is, too, that this NATO alliance is going to be running into Russia sooner or later over Ukraine. And that's my greatest fear is, will we have either a world war or a nuclear conflict? Because there is that threat that Dmitry Peskov makes to CNN saying that if we feel an existential threat, we will make use of nuclear weapons. And the military strategy of Russia has been that, to resort to nuclear weapons much earlier than our national security policy would.
Yeah, but they haven't ever done that. I mean, that's a debate that you see going on today. Is this simply bluff or a threat? And one would think that people who act rationally would not use that response, a nuclear response. But then we don't know. Are there rational decision makers in the Kremlin?
Well, that's a good question. And should we go further, close the skies, bring in anti-aircraft weaponry, anti-air weaponry? Can we do that without those supplies being fired on by the Russians or not? Can we bring in more planes? Because the problem is that the Ukrainians will need to be sustained if the Russians choose to bring in these heavier weapons. I don't know if they'll do it.
What is
Anara, you're about to make a point too.
Yes.
If I may, yeah, I'm sorry. Anara, go ahead.
I think that we actually, Chris discusses a wider picture, what we should do in order to prevent future Dresden, future Hiroshima, future Mariupol, and so on. And I think that this was actually discussed previously, that we should reconsider what is a national security, what is a human security. And Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada actually adopted this concept. It's in minority, of course. And even if you open the actual official website of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, you can find conception of human security, that human security is more important than national security. Briefly, Hillary Clinton talked about this when we discussed women, children, refugees, and so on. And Japanese government supported certain projects at UNESCO level, and I was involved in this actual project, and we discussed the principles of human security that should be discussed and accepted by governments as official doctrine, and they should emphasize human security rather than focus solely on national security. And I think that there are unfortunate, and I see a huge gap when we compare position and discussions, public discussions in Canada and in the United States, and in some countries in Europe.
And of course, I wouldn't want to discount what the United States has been doing. We're probably more involved on than in terms of a monetary basis and military basis more than anybody else. But it just seems like the past oftentimes is a guideline for our behavior when we're confronted with a situation. We tend to kind of hedge for a while and then direct our resources in areas where we believe that we can make that we can be victorious. In this situation, because of the nuclear issue, then it's going to be more difficult. And I think if we look back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, we can see an example too, where there were cooler heads, but there were also hot heads on all three sides, I should say. But in one case, with Castro, we have evidence from him from October 26th, where he actually sent a letter to Khrushchev saying that you have to be willing to use those nuclear missiles if the U.S. even invades, even if the U.S. didn't use nukes. And Khrushchev responded, that would be crazy. But I just use that example because if people feel desperate, historically, they have expressed, especially in Cuba, they expressed the possibility of actually launching World War III.
Yes. I think, would we wind up sleepwalking into a world war? I don't know. I mean, the problem is that I see that the long-term strategy for at least Putin is to remake the whole Ukrainian nation and to remake the whole security arrangement for Europe through brute force. And then what do you do with that? And I mean, if this war continues all the way through 2022, the Ukrainian economy will be in tatters. Would they be able to sustain that kind of an operation to just slowly, or I guess gradually, just wear down the Ukrainians? I don't know. That's the greatest challenge. Those of us who side with Ukraine, we have to keep this. The argument that you would have to keep this going. For how long? As long as it takes.
Welcome, Grubers. Did you have a question? Or Larry? Anyone else? Well, if anybody else has a point to make, they can make it. Otherwise, we can close up.
Let's see. I'm looking at chat questions. Yes.
I think the groupers have something to say, but the mic is off.
Okay. Larry, did you have a question or a point to make?
No.
Okay.
I wanted to ask if anyone heard more on Baltics, because the speakers of parliaments of all three Baltic countries were yesterday in Kiev to show their support, as were the I think prime ministers of Poland, Slovenia, and Czech Republic last week or so. So these gestures are important. It is, maybe history professors will help me here. In talking with my friends, I'm trying to make analogies, and I constantly fail, because this is not like any war we have seen before, in modern times at least. It is very, how to say it, eclectic, to be academic, with archaic goals and ambitions combined with modern media and weapons, and plus the reality show style performance, enormous amount of fake information, and confused populace of every country, up to the points when Israelis tell me they cannot make conflicts with Russia because Russians protect them from Syrians, and things like this. Chuck, we admit you right now, and you need your microphone if you wish to speak. Please. It's not.
Okay. There's a lot of reverb here.
I think we have 3 Grubers in the attendance list here, so we should kick out. Oh no, we have 3 of them, 2 of them. I'm not sure which account is the one that was able to have to unmute themselves.
Oh yeah.
And if we kick out the other
accounts,
accounts,
make any points?
Fine.
Stefan, did you want to make any points too?
Stefan, yes, please.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was just mostly commenting on the Gruber accounts, and I think if we kick out two of them, the other one can speak, and we don't have the feedback. Maybe I could just add one of the numbers, since we're talking about the Baltics. One of the numbers that I just saw is that I think Estonia is the country, the third highest supplier of weapons to the Ukraine right now, which is astonishing, right? It's US, UK, Estonia, right? So that tells you a lot about the investment by Baltic states in the conflict.
Great. Yeah, I didn't know that either.
And also, Estonia has the huge percentage of Russian ethnic and Russian-leaning population, which always formed, so to say, fifth column for Putin. And Estonia knows it is on the next call, and it should prepare after Ukraine. So a number of people are saying, if NATO doesn't wish to fight for Ukraine, why would they wish to fight for Estonia? That's more a rhetorical question, but there is a famous city of Narva for which Peter the Great used to fight in his time. It is mostly Russian-speaking city on Estonian side. And I think the question a few years ago was, will NATO fight for Narva, just like remembering Danzig in Second World War?
That is my question as well. Actually, I do follow the Estonian and Latvian media because I'm actually learning both languages to expand my research interests. And I mean, they're going to cancel May 9th celebrations in Riga because of they sense this security threat there, and they want to express solidarity with Ukraine. The symbol of Z, which has been used to support this military operation, has been banned in Latvia, and Estonians are considering what security threat it might mean. That is, though, the very good question is besides what will happen to Ukraine, will NATO be able to defend a fellow member in the East? And that includes Poland as well as any of those Baltic states. And it remains to be seen if that will really happen, should the conflict spread.
Aren't there U.S. troops there in the Baltics now, and air bases currently?
Yes.
And that would seem to me that presence would be a deterrent, unless, as you suggest, Dr. Risch, this sleepwalking into a war. But surely the Russians know that. The problem is, I think, as you also suggested, Putin's goal, to the extent it's intelligible, is to reconstitute either the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union without communism, just with authoritarianism. So Ukraine is likely not the last stop on his quest.
Right, and I mean, I think it is very important to bring in the 19th century, because when we look at what is seen as sort of outdated ideology, it seems to be coming from the 19th century. Alexander Dugin and the Eurasianists, who talk about how Ukraine is an integral part to the Russian Empire, to imperial greatness, and perhaps, the Baltic provinces that used to be part of the Russian Empire would be next.
This was exactly the point. None of us Russian intellectuals, kind of Western-leaning, both expats and in Russia, took these guys seriously for the last 20 years. They were somewhere on the fringes and more like fantasy writers than politicians. But I like to quote in last week's Holocaust survivor who said famously, never underestimate when your neighbor tells you they want to kill you.
And of course, Dr. Risch, were you referring to the author within the Izborsk Club?
Yes. Yes. I want to also just say, as a historian, that I'm brought back. I'm reminded of when I was an undergraduate studying history at Hiram College in Hiram, Ohio. And actually the professor who taught Russian history, he later retired to Lewisburg, West Virginia. And one of the things he made us do was we had to read about current events. At that point in time, it was still the Soviet Union, and we were looking at the crisis that Gorbachev faced. One of the articles that I had to read talked about the fate of empires, and that the collapse of empires did not signify better times ahead, but more instability, more conflict, more war. And that was the last paragraph of the article, and it's still very true today, is that we're living with the consequences of the fall of the Soviet Union, which haven't been as clean as we had hoped. The hope that we would create a family of nations in Europe that would get along with, whose members would get along with each other, unfortunately, has not come to pass.
One term I never hear in last weeks, at least in American media, is post-colonial.
Yeah.
I'm sure that we are dealing with combination of conflict types, whatever you guys classify them, but clearly what happened in the last 30 years in post-Soviet areas has a huge post-colonial component. I spent 10 years in Turkmenistan in my career, now independent post-Soviet dictatorship, which just elected its next president, heir to the throne. You might know that first post-Soviet president of Turkmenistan, called Turkmenbashi, Saparmurat Niyazov, renamed the January in his own honor and April in his mother's, which reminded everyone of Emperor Augustus. I don't think Augustus renamed himself the month of August in his honor, though. So anyway, these archaic trends are popping up everywhere. I mean, everywhere. It's so easy, and you don't need to read anything about national psyche. It's enough not to have even Dugin, but some, college professor who invents some theory, and they implement it if they have enough ammunition.
Yeah.
So it has not been seen in Soviet Union only because it was so suppressed. But the moment the lid was off, like in Yugoslavia, things are coming up. I don't know if I take too much of your time, but just a short story for those who haven't heard it, my personal. I was in a zoological expedition in southwestern Bulgaria at the point when American bombers came over us to bomb Belgrade. And Bulgarians came, I was almost hiding from them because I was an American, but they were hugging me, saying, you guys show those Serbs what it means to be strong, because they took Macedonia from us.
Oh, yes.
So these animosities, they smolder, they never, it's Balkans, powder keg in larger scale. And it works not just both ways, it works all ways. I'm pretty sure that I'm not sure, I know, that there are many Ukrainian intellectuals who refuse to speak Russian anymore. And after the war, Russian will not be a minority language which will be allowed to exist along with Ukrainian. No schools will teach it as mandatory language, I'm afraid. So it will be lingua franca of erstwhile empire, but mostly for us expats to deal with refugees because we don't know Ukrainian.
I think there's one joker in the historical deck here, and that's the modern electronic communication that is totally new. Obviously, Putin understands it by shutting down internal communications. He also understands it because of his success with interfering with the American elections in 2016. But that's a totally new context in world history. There's always been propaganda, but not the ability to communicate it so quickly to millions of people. And one of the questions here with regard to Russia and how Russians will respond is, is there any communications that will get through to working class Russians about the reality of what's going on in Ukraine? I mean, that's really uncharted territory. I don't know what to expect, but it's clearly going to. Well, we're talking about television. That's certainly having an effect today. Being able to watch the war every day in Ukraine, and as I said earlier, it made an enormous difference with American involvement in Vietnam. But we've got multimedia, electronic communications now, and it's hard to visualize how that might work. It could be positive or negative.
But when American companies, as I hope, pull all the software and hardware support, Russia will be grading into Stone Age by the end of this summer. They will not have phones anymore. That's the reality. They will not have computers. I expect Microsoft pulling the support away.
Really? Okay.
Why not? I mean, Subway is now filling for McDonald's because McDonald's pulled out, so Subway has not. That's ridiculous. I have just seen a letter. I don't know if it's already in English. I'm translating it right now. From Maxim Frank Kamenetsky, one of the foremost Russian molecular biologists who is in Harvard. And he was standing to the last end for communication with Russian academics, even after Crimea. Now he cut all the ties, and he suggests for total embargo and total boycott of all cultural, scientific, and pharmaceutical communications. And of course, he is condemned for this, but I am not 100% supportive. I still have friends in Russia, but I want to know that they are against the regime before I continue projects with them. I don't want don't ask, don't tell situation, really. For me, it is important.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion from a variety of different voices, and on behalf of Marshall University, I want to thank everybody for their participation. Professors Weise and McGinley up at WVU Law, and Professor Risch from Georgia College. Very much look forward to your next book on the Euromaidan. And thanks to Dr. Fett from the Biological Sciences Department at Marshall University, Anara Tabyshalieva from History, and Larry Sherritt from the libraries here, and Stefan Schoeberlein, and my student Giselle Tribble. Thank you for being here as well. Thank you to the Grubers and everybody else who participated. If we're going to be able to post this, Larry's going to be working on posting the recording of this sometime in the next couple of days, and it'll be on the MUkraine website.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. Thank all of you. We learned, Suzanne and I learned a lot from this conversation, and we appreciate that Marshall is doing this.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And a shout out to Kateryna if she's listening to this recording too. Hope you recover very soon.